Okay, cool.
Wait, can you see me all right on the camera?
I feel like I look very third wave feminism in my red turtleneck.
Yeah, it's all like half of feminism is the look, right?
Do you know what I mean?
Maybe that's what the book will say, right?
Okay, so the background light is on. Let me just turn it off. Entertain yourself. Oh no, now you can't see my ugly
So much
pants.
pressure. Wait, did you give the viewers like the whole full body like polka dot trousers?
I feel like this would not be the podcast episode to do a full body shoot right now when we're talking about beauty.
No, but you've literally dressed as like the epitome of work from home chic because you've got like the very like professional, well put together top half and then pajamas at the bottom.
It's true.
I've like completely exposed the whole illusion, haven't I?
Yeah, I know. And I don't know. Some people might think I'm doing it on purpose. Anyway, so Judah, welcome back.
Myth. Thank you for having me.
It's honestly a pleasure. And before we kind of dive into this one, I just want to stress that so I have read, this podcast is the debate series, Beauty a Myth? And it's based on Naomi Wolf's book, The Beauty Myth. I've been reading this for the past week, making notes on things which I find really interesting. And then Judah very kindly, very last minutely, has agreed to come on the pod and debate this with me because he's my only friend.
Well, it's a good one to have though, isn't it?
It is.
It's quality, not quantity.
Exactly.
What I will just say though is that I actually haven't read the book.
Yes.
So I think what you said is the way we're going to do this is you'll talk a little bit about the content from the book. We'll understand a bit about what the author's arguments are, and then we can have a chat about that between us.
Yeah.
So it won't be as informed, I imagine, as what you're going to be saying, but I think it'll still be fun to do anyway.
I mean, nothing that you say will ever be as informed as what I'm trying to say, but no, I'm joking. I'm
Cheers,
joking.
bro.
You're welcome. Just throw you under the bus there. So before we kind of dive into it, the kind of key thing or the key statement that she says that I want to put out there is that the ideology of beauty is the last one remaining of the old feminine ideologies that still has the power to control those women whom the second wave feminism would have otherwise made relatively uncontrollable. Now, that sounds a little confusing.
I don't really get what you just said.
Okay, so how I've understood it in the last week of reading is that Naomi Wolf, and by the way, this book I think was written in the 90s. Wait, Naomi Wolf, The Beauty Myth. I just want to double check when this was written. Did it say on the first page? 1991.
Yes.
Okay, so it was written around the early 90s, late 80s, I think.
1990.
Right, okay, so it is not necessarily out of date, but it's just from the perspective of them, so what I have understood from this book is essentially that is that beauty, the idea of physical beauty, is a social construct, is a myth, which has been created by not necessarily individual men, but by institutions which are controlled from men, from a collective of men. No man in particular, but because of society of where we are today, and because that has been created because men have had more power throughout history and more opportunities, and women have been suppressed throughout history, that we are now controlled. We live in a world today where from what they've seen as correct, whether that be misogynist views or repressive views, that those things still carry on today. And even though that with first wave feminism, which first wave feminism occurred in the 19th century and the 20th century, and that was largely concerned with women and getting the right to vote. And then in the second wave feminism, feminist wave, you have in the 60s and 70s, which refers to women liberation movement for equal legal and social rights. And so now that we've kind of got to a place in today's world, 2020, where we largely have financial equality in terms of with men, we largely have equality in terms of sex by having contraception and the pill and legal rights to have an abortion. We arguably have equal educational... Sorry, you've got the squeaky chair.
I do. I'm going to have to be really still, aren't I?
I know, you have to be really still. Stop moving. We largely have equal rights in terms of education, in terms of controlling our own finance. And so Naomi Wolf argues that because we have all these equalities now, the way that we still need to be repressed by men is through beauty, is by our looks, so that even if you break that glass ceiling and you go far, you will always be psychologically trapped from all these social things that we see in the world, images of models, she calls it beauty pornography, soft porn, beauty pornography, that we are so indoctrinated that we're trapped in our own brains. And she says very interestingly that the closer women get to power, the more intense pressure the beauty myth places on them as an attempt to undermine that power. I just want to pause and just repeat that because I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. So the closer women get to power, the more intense pressure the beauty myth places on them as an attempt to undermine that power. And I don't know if, before we dive into the different ways of how I want to talk about this, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I went to an all-girls school, lots of really, really intelligent girls who went to that school, and a pattern, and I remember which my teachers used to tell us when they were warning us about eating disorders, is that typically, not all the time whatsoever, typically it's the really intelligent, really smart, driven girls and boys who tend to also have the eating disorders, whether that's, for whatever reason that might be, but I just thought that was a really interesting correlation. And so when we go in to talk about this, there are kind of different ways that different phenomenons that Naomi Wolf draws upon to highlight how beauty is a myth. And some of those, as she says, in pornography, how women are either displayed as kind of like the big breasted, blonde, like sexual woman. She also talks about how feminists now, when you think of them, largely they've been cast or described throughout history and in social like works or whatever, is like the ugly feminists. So you have like, they have armpit hair, they like burn their bras, they don't give a fuck, they're quite masculine, and how these two images have been painted of women. She talks about religion, how religion has been a source of repression for women, because religion was largely written by men and painted women as subservient to men and should be owned by men, and their whole entire job is to serve them and have children and be the virgin, etc. She talks about diet culture, how when you look at diet culture, which is something I really want to talk about with you, and anorexia, eating disorders, bulimia, and she also talks about plastic surgery and how that is basically women completely like going under the knife and destroying what they look like to conform to a beauty standard or what society deems as beautiful. Mm-hmm.
So just a question, because I think there's a lot of stuff that we're going to have to unpack there.
Yeah.
And I'll let you take us through which topics you want to go through first. It would just be great to understand whether you think that this is a framework or a concept that applies to men as well. And the reason I ask that is because I absolutely agree with what you're saying and what the author says about how the concept of beauty has been driven by institutions. And I think one of the things she talks about is, she's an American author, so Macy's, for example, defining what it is to be beautiful based on the stuff that they're trying to sell. Because we live in a capitalist consumerist society, it's always going to be creating aspirations of how we should be presenting ourselves that ultimately leads to buying more stuff. So it's aspirational beauty that comes with a price tag. Now, my question to you is, taking aside, the gender aspect for a second, do you think that that's something that men have to battle with or have to navigate as well?
Okay, so I think that's a really interesting question. I think that typically throughout history, beauty to women is money to men. So I know that sounds weird, but I think that the pressure that women have to feel and look beautiful, men in the past and historically have had that pressure from society for power and money. And so I don't think there has been that same link of beauty and aesthetics to men. However, I think for the last 25 years, or some of the research that I've done, is that these beauty corporations and institutions have started to cotton on to the fact that actually men are an easy target as well.
Yeah.
And so they've really jumped on the bandwagon of, diet pills now are also available to men, and you have protein powder. I mean, those things were typically around for a while anyway, like steroids and looking strong and powerful.
Yeah.
But that whole idea of looking strong, I think, relates to the power, and money can also bring you that kind of power. And so I think that as well, that's where this notion of, this typical idea, which we kind of we don't even really think about now. It's so obvious when we see an old man and a really young, blonde, typically quote unquote beautiful girl.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, yeah, it's exactly as you're saying. One might be forgiven for jumping to the assumption that it's a money thing,
Right.
or that there isn't the romantic interest there, or at least that it's some of the power that she might be attracted to.
Right.
Again, like obviously you can never generalize with these things, but I completely get what you're saying.
You can never generalize, but the reason why there are stereotypes is because largely sometimes these stereotypes are based on something that is true.
Yeah.
And I think that regardless of whether that really rich old man or whether that really young, beautiful woman, whether they've consciously thought about what they're doing, they've accepted societal pressures of this guy, he's got a lot of money, therefore he deserves this beautiful young in particular woman, and they have agreed on that kind of exchange, like money and beauty is a form of like commerce.
So that's really interesting. So there was something that I was watching on BBC the other day. It's a 3-part series on the rise of the Murdoch dynasty. And one of the things that series looked at was when Rupert Murdoch was remarrying, I think maybe it was his third wife. He remarried very late in life when he was, past the point of retirement, to a woman from China who was about 30 years, I believe, younger than him. And she was, what people would typically describe as beautiful. Like, she had very symmetrical characteristics. She was in good shape. People might have jumped to the conclusion that is that just the relationship you were talking about. So what beauty is to women, money and power is to men. But then this was a woman who was also very ambitious, had a very brilliant mind, and was hungry to rise in terms of her career as well. So I think you could say that even if beauty is an aspect of it, and this is something that drew him to her. This is only one example, but I think it is still equally important that it's about a mental connection, and it's about having somebody who's mentally stimulated. So if we're talking about how do we value people in society and who gets ahead? Absolutely, I think beauty is something that has allowed people to rise and that has put unfair pressure on people to conform to. But I think that in and of itself is not enough for people to be able to rise to the top of these corporations and stuff, and that actually it's one tool in somebody's arsenal that they might be able to use, but they also need to have ambition and drive, because there's so many beautiful people that you see that are, not doing things that are as significant in terms of career or, aren't in the public light. But, so yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but so just so I clarify, so what you're saying that, yes, beauty is an aspect. You're speaking specifically about success right now for women. So you're saying that beauty, if I'm right, beauty is an element which can contribute to a female being successful, but is not the end all and be all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things that it definitely is a positive factor. I think it's one of those things that is very good at being able to disarm people. So you might feel at ease if you're speaking with a woman and she's very beautiful, and she might know that and be able to use that as, part of her to her advantage. In the workplace, for example, I think it's an interesting one, because if I understand what you're saying in this book is arguing, it's saying that actually we shouldn't have to conform to that, and it's something that has been put on top of us. Mm-hmm. But actually, I think that takes away the agency of the women themselves. And if you have somebody who is beautiful and they know it, and they say, well, how can I rise to the top of my organization, or how can I get ahead, or whatever, I don't think there's anything wrong with using that.
Okay, so this is, in my eyes, this is the problem, because I totally agree with you in the sense that if you're a beautiful woman and you can use that to your advantage on top of furthering your education and doing, becoming like more of an enriched human being through learning, through education, through just being whoever you want to be, whether that's like being creative or not, that opportunity is limited to such a tiny percentage of the population, because it's objective when everyone kind of agrees something is beautiful, or okay, so if you have somebody who, because it's been so indoctrinated in us as to what beautiful is from magazines, from movies, it's like skinny. I mean, this is not now, and I know it's changing, but this is like skinny, blonde, blue eyes, soft features, like small features, being petite, being tall, all these things. If now that we have that ingrained in our heads of that's what's beautiful, if we see someone who's like that objectively, then we're all, yeah, like you said, maybe she can get ahead and maybe it's easier to talk to that person and we'll be more receptive to them. But the problem is, like, what about all these people who don't have that? And there's more of an issue on that as well, because how do you even know that those women are secure? Because they know that their beauty is going to fade one day, and that creates a whole other topic on this. But what about all the people who don't have that? Like, why is that fair? And why have we all agreed that, and have we all consciously agreed that woman objectively is beautiful?
So I think the reason that I brought in the thing about the mind and ambition and it just being one element is, there's, I think, a couple of types of beauty that we need to discuss. There's absolutely the magazine marketing beauty, which is there to sell more products. But what I understand beauty to be is not just a aesthetic visual thing, but it's that if you have somebody who is a kind person, who is very in tune with who they are, who is looking after themselves mentally and physically, and living a balanced and well-rounded lifestyle, I think that makes them beautiful people and people that others want to connect with.
Okay, sure, but that is not what we're talking about. So
Okay.
if we're talking just about physical beauty, like, I fully agree with you that looks is not just the only thing that makes someone beautiful. It also is most definitely like who they are as a person. But in terms of like just having physical beauty, like going back to what you said about what's his name? Rupert Murdoch,
yeah.
Going back to him about that woman, like, she, even if she has all these amazing qualities and stuff, I mean, I don't know, but like arguably she got her foot in the door by having those looks, and then she used what she had, what we would deem as beautiful qualities, potentially being really ambitious and driven, to build that like kind of like lasting relationship with him. So I guess what I would ask in that is, if I had to ask you a question based on that, like, do you think that it is morally wrong and like a social construct, if beauty is a social construct, that we should try and undo and untrain our eyes into recognizing a face and thinking that's beautiful, and I'm going to associate warmth and openness and welcomeness and willing to talk to that person based on their physical appearance, regardless of whether they're beautiful because of X other qualities?
Well, the question you're asking there is beauty a social construct, or is it something that we have intrinsic within ourselves as humans, as animals? Is that something that we're naturally drawn to?
Yeah, let's go to that, because I feel like that is the basic of the basis of the conversation, and I would like to know your general opinion on that.
So I think that everybody on an individual level I think people are naturally drawn to stuff that's beautiful. And if we move away from people for a second, imagine you're sat on a beach, the sunset is going down, and why is it that everybody on the beach is staring at the sunset? It's not because we're drawn to heat or light or whatever. It's because whatever it is, whatever you think beauty is, there are certain things that you just look at and you think, wow, there's certain things that capture our attention. So if you take that and you say, well, within people as well, there are certain people that, do just capture your attention, both women and men. So I think beauty is something that is intrinsic and occurs naturally. I think the problem with beauty, as I understand it, is that what Naomi's talking about is that we've redefined what people should think is beautiful, and it's been packaged up, and like you say, it's been packaged up by predominantly men and corporate institutions to be able to forward their own agendas, and then that has a trickle-down effect on how women or how people are able to get ahead in office environments or whatever, and it moves away from meritocracy towards beauty as a unfair defining characteristic that helps people get ahead. So I think beauty is something that is naturally occurring. I think people are naturally drawn to it, but I think it is problematic that there is this concept and this notion of beauty that is pushed onto us and that causes people to feel inadequate. Now, something that I would love to understand from you, and I think it will be way past the scope of the author, because this was written 20 odd years ago, is how do you think things like Instagram and social media have warped what we think beauty is?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I find crazy is all these filters and the ways that people can edit photos of themselves so that even if you take a picture of yourself head on, you can completely adapt it to these false standards of what we think beauty is.
Yeah, I think that it's a good question, and reading this book and thinking about things like that, because I've been actively thinking about it. I've been thinking like what I did in the past with Progress Pure and fitness and all of that stuff, how much does that also feed into this? Like, how much of that was just me feeling pressured by forces that I wasn't even really aware of in like motivating my actions, and like what was I doing, like not in terms of like what are you doing, you know, not a judgmental thing, but like genuinely what was I doing, and what kind of like hunger was I fulfilling in that, because clearly I was fulfilling some kind of like desire or want to look a certain way. And so anyway, reading this book, it was genuinely quite sad for me, because I was like, oh my god, like I can't believe I wasn't aware of this. And so answering your question in terms of how do I think social media plays a role in this, is that and like filters, I think that 100%, like now reading this, I just realized that it's so crazy, because so typically like if you use an Instagram filter, they are so fucked up. They like give you longer eyelashes, they clear your skin, they make you look younger, they, you know, smooth out wrinkles, they, you know, make the color of your hair nicer, like get rid of random like frizz bits and stuff. And it made me think, this book, I was like, wait, why do I think being younger is better? Why do I think having less wrinkles is better? Why do I think making it look like you have bigger boobs and like a smaller waist, like why is that better? And then I realized, okay, I think that's better because, you know, my mum told me to not eat this type of ice cream because I'm going to get fat, or because, you know, someone told me on the street, like, well, not someone told me in the street, this didn't happen, but like one of my friends told me that maybe I shouldn't wear that because like my stomach sticks out a little bit more. And so those things are offshoots of everything that they've seen, and everything that they've seen is Heat magazine that circles, you know, horrors of the week, and it tells you that it's like cellulite is bad. And then I think, okay, why do we think cellulite is bad? And that's partly because there's this billion, I think it's like $300 billion industry, or it was in 1990s, of companies, Clarins, Elizabeth Arden, everyone telling you cellulite is bad, so buy this. You know, wrinkles are bad, so buy that. And it just makes me think, do we objectively see those things as bad, or do we only see those things as bad because they're making money? And it makes me think that all of this is economically motivated.
So I think that last point you made, absolutely. I think the reason we think these things are bad is because the companies have something to gain in pushing their anti-aging cream or whatever.
They make money.
But if we go back to what you said just now at the beginning, which is it made me reconsider what I was doing in the early days with Progress Pure. So I remember when we first started gymming together back in what must have been like, 2016, 2014 even? 2014, maybe. So I remember when you first started to do the health stuff, and like you were really getting into the workout routines and stuff. And look, there was a lot of, this is me posing, this is like the gym wear and stuff that I do, and it was a whole lifestyle thing. But how many people do you think you've inspired to take control and take ownership of their health? And I think it's a big difference between cosmetic and superficial beauty versus, you know, being in a really good physical state. I think that is absolutely something to celebrate and to aim towards.
Yeah.
So, look, I think, are there unrealistic standards of beauty that are put out there by the media and put out there by shops and fashion labels and that kind of thing? Absolutely. But there's also a different type of beauty, which is the beauty of being able to really look after yourself. And it's things like eating well, sleeping enough, exercising. And I think that kind of beauty, so it doesn't have to be, do I have the right shade of makeup on, do I have the blonde hair, whatever. I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's very toxic. I think it leads to a lot of mental health problems for people. But I think we absolutely should be promoting, you know, a healthy, balanced lifestyle, getting people to want to be in shape, because ultimately it leads to a happier life, it leads to a longer life. And you know, we were talking earlier before I came onto the podcast, like if I look at my experience over the last 12 months, so you know, beginning of 2019 I got really big, I put on a lot of weight, and then went on a massive health kick for, you know, the past few months. And if I just look at, well, how are people treating me, or how are my interactions with other people are a lot more open and friendly.
Yeah, but okay, yes, but there's one I want to highlight, just sorry to interrupt you, but there's a difference between being fat and risking your health, and then and then slimming down and looking a certain way because people are gonna, and people treating you better because of that. So like, it just makes me, if somebody is overweight and if they're fat, I'm not a proponent of that. I think 100% take that lifestyle and make sure that you prioritize your health, absolutely number one. However, like, going back to the Progress Pure thing, I had try and get to the root of this and think like, okay, you know, and it seems very frivolous when you talk about it. Like, I have videos on there being like how to get abs and like how to get a bigger butt and like how to lose weight on this place. And even though, yeah, it's good because I'm encouraging people to take their health into account, maybe they reduce their alcohol level. People did reach out to me saying, you know, my health is so much better now. But then what I was complying with is basically telling people that having fat on your stomach is bad. And so, and maybe, yeah, having some fat on your stomach is bad, but telling people, like, but why is that bad? Like, why do women want to look smaller and more petite and more delicate? Do you know what I mean? Like, why do men want bigger muscles and like, and why do you want a six pack? Firstly, do you want a six pack?
I would love to, yeah.
Okay.
It's the goal, yeah.
But why is it the goal?
So I think for me, look, it's always going to be, part of it is how am I perceived by other people. And I think if I said that it wasn't, I think that would be dishonest. But why am I on a health kick and why do I enjoy it? I think part of it is it gives you that inner confidence and it makes you feel happier with who you are as a person. Now, so so what you're saying is, do we feel like we're happier as a person because we're told that this is what a good person looks like?
Yeah.
I think that even before, okay, so I'll give you an example as my inner history nerd coming out. But if you go back to, you know, Greek and Roman times, if you've ever been around the British Museum and you see there's these big statues of like ripped guys with like the six packs and stuff, I think we as a society and as a species have always put a value on people being physically, I guess, attractive. Like, we see that as a desirable quality.
But so the difference between the men and women, like, firstly, you're right. Goliath? No, so David and Goliath is fucking peng. Like, he's tall, he's got the abs.
Not me, David.
I just wanted to give you a compliment subliminally.
Cheers,
do you know what I mean? Like, he's got the hair, and when I see that sculpture, I think power, I think strength. When I see the ones of women, they're very different to what today would be the ideal. So the ones of women are like slightly bigger, rounded stomachs, very soft. They don't look like they go to the gym. And it makes me wonder, is that us objectively thinking, oh, that man is beautiful? Or are we linking that man to power and telling men that, no, you don't need to have a six-pack to look beautiful, but you need to be powerful? And back then, the terms of being powerful was physical prowess, because it was very unlikely you were going to be born into money and being a king. And
so I think if you look at the societies around the world, and like, yeah, I'm really happy that you brought this up, because actually, regardless of commercial interests, people are always like, because we're visual people and, you know, sight is one of the most used senses by us, it's of course there's going to be things that we're drawn to and there's going to be standards that we define, and I think that changes throughout history. So when I was in Ethiopia about 5 years ago, one of the things that I noticed is if you look on the billboards, the women who are chosen for adverts typically were a bit rounder and weren't as skinny and, you know, had, you know, very like full faces. And the reason for that is in a country which is less economically developed, that's seen as a sign of prosperity, being able to be, you know, slightly rounder and, you know, whatever. So
because you can afford to eat food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting because, of course, concepts of beauty are driven by a commercial interest, and back then would have been seen as indicators of somebody's status, whether it's I'm powerful or I am, you know, in some countries I am of, you know, childbearing capability or whatever it is. I think that's something that we've done throughout time. So it's a modern phenomenon that we've created these artificial and almost unobtainable concepts and notions of what beauty is. But to go back to the original question, do I think beauty is something intrinsic and do I think it's something naturally occurring? I think yes, because societies around the world define beauty in different ways, but it's always something that is aimed towards and to be aspired for.
Yeah, I think I agree in the sense that we have eyes for things that are beautiful, whether it be a person or a dog I mean, I probably shouldn't link people to dogs, but like a person or like a vase or anything, we can look at something and we think, oh, that's very pretty. The thing that kills me, and with the whole, like you talking about Ethiopia and even, you know, in different times linking women and beauty to fertility, like for example, like it's classic that men, I think typically, you know, I don't want to say they prefer these kinds of women because I don't think that's a healthy thing to say, but like are typically more sexually attracted to women with larger hips because they resemble childbearing hips, right? And so that woman is probably more fertile, and so they can drive evolution, which is the whole point of our existence. And then but in today, I want to go back to the point that Naomi Wolf like really talks about, which is the fact that because women have advanced economically, socially, politically, they still need to be repressed by society in some way. And so like back in the 20s to the 50s, you know, women were housewives, they were domesticated. And so institutions would make money and profit from women by spending their husband's money by saying, hey, you're going to be the better housewife, which was the ideal if you buy this broom. And today, because they can't sell that idea to women, what they can do is kind of trap them psychologically and say, you can be even better and even more attractive if you buy these diet pills, if you buy this corset thing, you know, if you spend this amount of money on a personal trainer. So that no matter, I just want to know your opinion on whether you think that's true, because then no matter how successful a woman becomes, she will always be trapped in this ideal that she's never thin enough, and that she's never beautiful enough. And it's also super interesting because this whole idea of a woman never being beautiful enough is all centered around the male gaze accepting her, which is also interesting considering that the male gaze is kind of irrelevant because they would probably like someone who had bigger boobs, was probably 10 pounds heavier, and isn't, you know, like animalistically probably not so drawn to somebody who has like a very skinny frame. But like that's what we've been told as women is our desirable thing. So does that concept make sense to you, that because we can't repress women anymore in terms of society? I mean, we probably still can, but whatever. In terms of society, that the industries have kind of tried to trap women in their brains to feel like they can't ever get ahead. They can never be fully happy, and they can never fully, because if they have full sexual, not necessarily sexual, but like physical liberation, then that's a real threat to men.
So absolutely, I agree with everything that you just said. I think it makes a lot of sense. And as a concept, like, well, if you look at who stands to benefit from that pattern and that entrapment, and you know who's defining what these standards are, and you know what's the outcome of it, absolutely it makes sense that these companies are gearing all of their marketing and advertising towards unattainable standards, because if you can never get there, you'll keep purchasing to be able to get to that point.
Exactly.
And again, I think that that's something that is a challenge with consumerism in general, because we're always told, whether we're men or women or children, that nothing you buy will ever get you to where you need to be. So you need to keep going, and you need to keep going and going and going. And the reason that we can never get to the finish line is because the finish line keeps getting moved, and it keeps getting, you know, changed what the kind of ideal end goal is that we're trying to get towards. So in the context of what you just spoken about, absolutely, I think that's a challenge. But one of the things that I want to know is, do you think that it's especially, obviously the whole book is talking about it in terms of the female experience. Do you think that this is going to become more and more of a problem for men and for people in general? Because as you know, traditional concepts of masculinity are eroded, and you know, all of these sorts of things, it makes it easier for men to be trapped into that repressive cycle as well. Do you see that as being as much of a problem? Or
that's really interesting, because I was talking about this with my friend yesterday about how, like, what defines being feminine, what defines being masculine is being more and more eroded, which I think is a really good thing, because typically when people say I don't feel very feminine, you would think, oh, she doesn't feel very cute or vulnerable or sensitive. And if someone say I don't feel very masculine, I would probably think, oh, they don't feel very aggressive or tomboyish or boisterous, you know. And I think that as those terms diminish, and maybe the barriers between feeling more like a woman or feeling, or like a, you know, quote unquote woman, or feeling more like a man are eroded, then perhaps we are going to move to a place where this does affect men more. However, maybe this in general will deteriorate, this whole idea of being able to get ahead. I mean, I don't know, like, it's difficult because these terms come from like men looking at women as like a sexual being, or she links beauty to sex a lot, which is really interesting, and how these cultures have kind of deemed that if you are beautiful, then you can kind of like unlock that chastity belt, and like you kind of are deserving of sex. And I think that if the barriers are like decreased, or are, like we said, eroded more and more, then maybe men, I'm just trying to imagine if there was no gender, like if we were, do you know what I mean? Like,
well, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So I have recently bought so I've bought my face wash, my exfoliator, my toning thing, and then my moisturizer, and I've started doing that every day. So I've been sold a concept of this is what it takes to look after yourself and to look good and to present yourself, and here's the price tag associated to it. Now, I don't know the answer to this, but it would be good for you to hear you try and speculate. But like, why is it that I feel compelled that I have to go through that routine?
Well, this is the thing. I think that's society pushing itself on you, because like, one, it sounds like you've done that because you want to try and essentially look younger, because we've been told that looking younger is better. Now, it's very interesting that you've done that because you're a man, and because the idea of youth in men is not really so pushed upon us. Men have this free ticket to age and to still be attractive and to still be desired by women, largely because you guys are kind of in control, and you control how much, whether you desire us, which is what Naomi Wolf is kind of arguing, is like women have been brought up to desire to be desired. Okay. So you kind of have that control.
That's interesting.
And also you're in the realms typically of like money and power. So chasing beauty for men, I think, is more of an ingrained thing. However, now that you have the rise of gay, homosexuals, or men who or transgender, I'm not saying those are the same things, but men who are typically embracing femininity more. You have like K-pop, like in Japan, of these men who kind of looking like women. Justin Bieber's like latest video of Candy, him basically looking like what we would call a girl or feminine. Maybe you're buying into that more because those roles are diminishing.
Okay, and then it goes back to what you were saying, that the whole thing is what we see as beauty is defined by corporations, and we're told that you need to be a certain thing to be valid and to be deserving of desire. Which is okay, so I completely get that, and that actually answers my question of, well, why do I need to buy all these things? It's exactly the same for why a woman might be told I should wear this perfume, or I should buy this dress, or I should get my hair dyed in a certain color. It's because there's a concept of this is what we see perfect as a society, which is pre-created by people that are trying to sell more stuff.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because
sell more stuff and to repress women.
So do you think the repression of women is the primary reason, or do you think that is an effect of the desire to sell more stuff? And the reason I ask that is because the timeline that you talked about was typically women being housewives in the 40s, 50s, 60s before as well, and it was, look, buy this broom, you can be the perfect housewife. Now, as they enter into the realms of men, it's they're like, well, how can we still sell stuff to women? Or do you think it's that there are people that are trying to keep them out of positions, keep women out of positions of power? Because those are two different things, and I'm not saying that they aren't both effects, but it's which one comes first and which one is the primary motive.
Okay, so I think it could be both. I think that there is this notion of, and when I speak about this, I'm not talking about like personal experience, and this is just from my understanding and what I've learned, but like what I think is that, okay, so typically in a law firm, maybe 40 or 50 years ago, when it was dominated by men, and this is not men's fault, like, this is something that has also been pushed upon men, and, Judah, this is not your fault. I don't hate you. But, like, sure. You have also being programmed from like your grandmothers, maybe even your mum, like your grandmas, that a woman typically belongs in the home, is domesticated, is maternal, and the men have to kind of like earn money. And so I think that when those lines started, and thank God, you know, when women had access to more education and those first few women started joining law firms, I think that instinctively, unless you've been raised in a very, very progressive household, and even in that case, you're still subject to adverts of like women sexually drinking a Coca-Cola or like smoking a cigarette or whatever. It's all to do with like sex, because sex apparently sells. I think that instinctively those men in that law firm would have seen that woman as either a sexual being, or would have seen her as kind of a man, ugly, like feminist, intellectual, very unsexual being. And so I think that, and like men would have, you know, like maybe not in a law firm, but I was reading one case of men having like pinups, you know, of like women with like big boobs in like a coal mine or wherever they were. And when women first started coming to work in those work environments, feeling really, really uncomfortable. And I think the men, when they saw those women, didn't want to make those women feel secure because they didn't see women as on their level. So I think that whether they started saying things to them in a way that was like degrading, and putting those women down because they had linked what an ideal woman should be as either this like big breasted, like pornographic thing or something else, I think that would have repressed women in that way, and also contributed to the economy and capitalism of this is how you can stay younger and stay looking like, because if you put a photo of this pop-up, this pin-up girl on your wall, you're essentially telling a woman like this is the ideal, you know. And so women didn't have like people who they could look up to, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, they on the wall, you know what I mean? So when they see that, they think, okay, so the way for me to be desired and accepted in a man's world is to look like that. And so then companies or, you know, cosmetic industries realized, okay, so we can capitalize on that insecurity and we can sell women this idea that one day they can look like that and be desired by that man. Do you see what I mean?
I see exactly what you mean. I think one of the things that it'd be good to understand though is, do you think that is still as much of an issue now? And the reason I ask that is absolutely, I can see how that would have had that effect on women by having these male created notions of what a woman should be that are completely unrealistic, and actually, you know, those women don't exist. It's all posed and it's all enhanced for photographs. Absolutely, having that in the workplace would have caused feelings of inadequacy and anxiety and, you know, a feeling of exclusion. Now, when there's such a focus on gender equality and there's huge changes in the conversation, especially in a professional environment, around what is and isn't acceptable. Misogyny is a career-ending thing. If you're a man and you say something off color, you know, it's really bad, and as it should be. Do you think that oppression is still the reason that there are these unattainable notions of beauty, or do you think that it has now shifted from being primarily a repressive instrument to being one to further commercial interests of companies?
I think both. I think there's still glimmers of, I think it's really obviously massively improved since like the 90s. Because in the 90s you have, you know, Kate Moss saying nothing tastes as good as skinny feels, and you have, and it's so difficult because like bringing my own personal experience into this, as much as I hate to say that, like I understand that because I have felt, there are times where I have like tried to not starve myself now, but when I was doing those progress fuel thing, which we were talking about, like some days where I would try and restrict myself to like 1,200 calories, and I would do that for like a week or so, and then I would binge massively. And thinking about that, the joy I would get and I haven't had anorexia, I've never had bulimia, but like probably have had an eating disorder on some level to some degree, because that's just not a healthy relationship with food, and then like massively binging. But like I would feel so good, you know, about feeling skinny, and then thinking like, then when I would think about it now, I'm like, but why does that feel good? Like, who am I doing that for? And so I think in today's world, even though it might not be such an instrument of, listen, we are whoever the voices of we, trying to repress women by promoting diet pills, which is still very common, by telling women they should get a personal trainer, by how they should lose 15 pounds. Maybe it's not, maybe I don't think it's as black and white as these corporations are trying to repress women, but I think that maybe it's become so ingrained in our culture that, and in in the brain of a woman that's what we associate now with happiness, and so we just chase it without even thinking about it, which is really scary. Like today I was spinning, and I spin Saturday, Sunday. I work out 5 days a week.
Where do you spin?
Spin off London, cheeky plug. And I love it, right? And it's probably the same with you. Like, you love exercising. And I was on the bike spinning, and yesterday I ate loads. Like, I had loads of cookies, and I had crisps and popcorn and all this stuff. And I didn't feel good about myself because it wasn't healthy. And again, there's a line between healthy and physical beauty. But then I was on the bike, and I was working really hard and sweating. And I had to check with myself, like, am I pushing myself because I feel guilty, because I've eaten, because I don't want to gain weight, because I don't want society to think I'm fat, because that will indicate that I'm lazy, because then that will mean that I'm not sexual, because then a man won't want me. Do you know what I mean? I'm like trying to unpick all this shit in my head, and I'm like, oh my God, what is my own thoughts and what is society?
But you can say that about anything, and I think that's such a big rabbit hole. And you know, as I think I was saying either earlier in this or before we started recording, like, I think the most important thing with health and senses of beauty and whatever is to shift the focus from I want to look like this to I really enjoy the process of. And what I mean by that is, rather than saying I really want to have abs so that women will find me attractive, so that I can have more sexual partners, whatever, to I really love working out because it makes me feel fantastic and it de-stresses me and I love the process. If we change the conversation from you need to look like this to be valid to these are the things that we should as people be trying to go for, I think that puts a much more positive spin on what beauty is. Because look, it's what we were saying. Absolutely, if you're a man or a woman and you're in very good physical shape, there is something to be said about how that makes you feel and how it impacts other elements of your life. You walk with confidence, you're more happy, you have better skin, you have better hair. Like, all of this stuff comes from that. And I think that's great, but that's because you're trying to think, well, how can I live in the best and most happy and effective way possible? The flip side, and I think this is the core of the book, is saying, well, you've got all of these end states that we're told we need to get to. And if you get to this, then you will be able to unlock all of these things you're looking for. And absolutely, I think that's a very toxic and repressive set of ideas that we've come to adopt. So when you're saying, why am I on the bike? And why am I pounding it out to get, is it because I want to push myself as much as possible? Or is it because I ate something and I've got these notions of what it is to be beautiful? I think it's both. I don't think it's one or the other. But ultimately, I don't think it's a bad thing to some degree that we have these ideas that we want to better ourselves. And if we do indulge ourselves a little bit, you don't want to feel guilty, but equally, I think having a sense of discipline is important.
Yeah, I do fully agree with you. I think having a sense of discipline is very important. I think that it's tough because thankfully I have good mental health. Do you have good mental health, would you say?
I think so.
Yeah, I think I do. I think you do too. I mean, and I think a lot of people don't. I think you and me are in a very fortunate position where we can check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. You know, we can, we can think, okay, I'm exercising, this feels good and I really enjoyed it. But then again, somebody who's anorexic might tell themselves arguably the lie of I'm exercising and this makes me really feel good and this is the only way that I'm going to be happy. And that might not be the case. Just because that's true for you and I, do you know what I mean? Doesn't mean it's true for someone else. And it's difficult because then you go down a rabbit hole of, well, there are so many individual cases. But I don't know. It's just something that I've just started to think more and more about, and how potentially there is a line. And I do think being active is a good thing. And I think being in shape is a good thing. But then again, saying in shape, like, what does that mean? Like, is that just something that I'm saying because that's what I've been told by magazines that that's a good thing? Because if it is, then I can see how they've won to a certain extent. Like, I pay. There are things I don't pay for because I know that for me they're stupid and marginal. Like, I don't really pay to get my nails done anymore because I'm like, that's a stupid notion. Like, if you really think about it, like paying 30. I mean, you know, if I've got the cash, I will go and get my nails done. But like spending 30 quid for someone to put a color on my hands and like clean away dead skin is a bit crazy. But then you think, and I would love to get your opinion on this, plastic surgery. Like women, I mean, obviously men also go for plastic surgery, but the majority is women, and specifically cosmetic surgery. What is your opinion on Because when you look at a woman with like full lips, right, and because she's gone and got a lip job, you might find her more sexually attractive, and like how do you feel about women who get plastic surgery?
So it's really interesting, that question, and I think there's a couple of different ways you can look at it. First of all, like it really does break my heart that people are so dissatisfied and so unhappy with their physical appearance that they feel the need to go for, you know, what is potentially quite dangerous and harmful surgery to fix something that ultimately isn't broken. And I think that comes from everything that Naomi is talking about, which is false senses of what it means to be beautiful. Like, you know, you have to have this shaped nose or these kinds of lips or whatever it is. That is really sad, and I think it's incredibly toxic for people, especially at a young age, and especially with how much we're shown on social media and in magazines and things like that. What I will say is, if you're somebody who, like, so I think that is the cause of people feeling the need to alter themselves, and I'm very, you know, everybody should be able to do what they want, but it does make me sad that that is a thing people feel the need to do. That being said, if somebody is so dissatisfied with an element of how they look, and it is causing them a lot of upset, and they feel, you know what, actually there is a fix for this and I'm going to do that. You know, again, I think the cause of it is upsetting, which is we're sold this false notion of this is what you need to look like to be valid, but that is the reality that we live in. So
yeah,
you know,
but dude, that's like putting a, you know, not to be deep, but that's like putting a plaster on a broken leg. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, I get it too. If someone was that upset and distraught with what they look like and they said, I just need a boob job because they don't make me feel better. Like, I had no judgment for somebody thinking that, but that's an addiction.
No judgment at all.
That's like a sex addict saying, I just need to have sex because that's going to validate myself. Yeah. They're going to go and do it again, and 100%. They'll never feel right. And it's not their fault. It is society having put that on them, but they, like, people have got to unpack that.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what the route away from that is, but I agree with everything you just said, that I think it is societal pressure which is causing people to be so unhappy with themselves that they need to go to the knife to alter their appearance, and that is 100% whether they realise it or not for other people, and it's 100% a product of advertising and unattainable standards of beauty. So I'm with you there, yeah.
Yeah, I think the more, because I've definitely gone through. Have you ever thought about plastic surgery?
No, I'm.
You're beautiful as it is. You're David, right? I have definitely gone through periods of time where I've thought, oh, how much? Oh, actually, I have actually gone to a plastic surgery clinic. Mm-hmm. I totally forgot I did this last year. I'll be totally honest, like, I was just not happy with my thighs, and like I had tried to lose weight. I've always been somebody who's like always been relatively skinny on my top half, but like my bottom half has like always not been that skinny.
PPCG, right?
Yeah, no, PPCG, yeah. Progress Pure Curve Guide. And last year I had lost a weight and was trying to lose weight. And which now I want to say, like, I am lucky that I genuinely am happy with the way that I look like now, and I don't actively try and change the way that I look like, and that is the result of like years of you know, trying to actively love my body from a state of when I was like 12, 13, 14 to like holding my stomach and being like, oh, I'm so fat, blah blah blah. Now I'm lucky that I've done like that mental work, and I do love the way that I look now, and the way that I am and the way that I feel and blah blah blah. But last year I went through a bit of a like down thing, and I was like, God, it's so annoying. Like, I feel like I try and cut all this food out and I'm still have big thighs, and so I booked an appointment on Harley Street with a liposuction, because I heard my friend had done it, and apparently it was a really easy surgery, and so I thought, why not? Like, and I genuinely did think it would just be a really interesting experience to go do that. And I was 23 at the time, and I go to a Harley Street clinic, and I sit down with this woman in this like kind of shitty office, and she looks at me and she's like, oh, so you want to, and like, I'm not fat, and I don't have a problem, like, at all. And she looked at me and she was like, oh yes, you want to get it done? And she was like, you know, you're kind of in good shape. And I was like, yeah, thanks, but like, I always really wanted like really thin thighs. And she looked at me and she was like, yeah, okay, actually we could take some off here, and we could take some off there, and we could take some off there. And I was like, okay. She didn't ask me anything about my mental health, how I'm doing now. Have I seen a doctor?
Well,
what's my nutrition?
Right?
It's a business.
Yeah.
And then I said, how much is it? And it was like 16 grand or whatever. And I literally laughed and was like, if I, as a hardworking woman, I'm going to send 16 fucking grand
to get little chunks of you
cut off.
chunks
of me cut off.
No, you can't. Tesh. No.
No, obviously now I would never, ever, ever do that. And to be honest, at the time, I don't think I ever would have done it either. I think it was genuinely curiosity led. But people do that, and it's really sad.
It is sad. I think, look, it's one of those things that it's so difficult to understand like how to react, because these things aren't going to go away because there is such a demand for it.
But maybe we need to strive for that. Maybe we need to strive to, when people say, you like, oh, she's a bit fat, or like this and that, and like people around me do it all the time. I do it all the time. Maybe we've literally got to actively say to someone like, why do you think, like, just stop for a sec, like you've just said this, why do you think that? And like question them on that, and see if, unpack that within them, so that we don't let societal like pressures or institutions dominated by money cause us to like be so, what's the word, to be so within the dogma. Does that make sense?
I'll nod along and
just
say it. I get what you mean.
To be so led without actually thinking.
So it's every time somebody says something which challenges what we think beautiful is. So if somebody makes a comment which undermines how somebody is or what their appearance is, stopping and saying to them, well, look, you know, why do you think that isn't a desirable way to look, or where does that opinion come from? And I think you're right. If you unpack it and you go back and back and back far enough, it's because there are these institutions that are, you know, I'll agree with you, they are repressive, and they are commercially oriented, which tell us we need to look like this to fit in. And I think actually if more people stopped and were critical of what their notions of beauty were, I think it would make the world a much happier and, you know, more welcoming and more inviting place.
Just before we wrap this up, because I know you've got to go Yom Kippur and all of that.
Got to atone for all of my sins.
Dating apps, just really quickly, I want to talk about in relation to this. Like, I can say I date guys who I find very like charismatic or interesting or funny or whatever. And of course, if you have a dating app, though, I can't deny looks do come into play because of that. Do you think that I was trying to think if I would perhaps try and go for someone in these next couple of weeks, like try and organize a date with someone who typically I wouldn't, because I didn't find them as physically attractive to a certain level. Do you, and maybe that's a bad thing, and maybe I should try and not see people based on looks, when so much so, even though that's what they're designed for on these apps. Do you think that maybe this conversation has made you try to be more open to somebody who's not deemed as necessarily quote unquote beautiful? And if not, fair, just say it, because I'm not necessarily sure that I want to do that. I'm just thinking about it.
I don't know, but if you do it, I'll do it as well.
Go on a date with an ugly person. I'm joking. Guys, we're joking.
You need to check where you get those assumptions from, bro.
So true.
But next time you have me back on, I'll let you know how I get on.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming on the pod, Jude.
Anytime, Tesh.
Okay.